All right, CFL fans, here we go. Welcome to Season 8, Episode 6 of the BC Lions Den podcast. I'm your host, Brian Walrishan, alongside Cole McGarvey, and we'd like to thank you for joining us as always. Just a reminder to you all that YouTube is the best place to watch the show. You can participate in the show, send in your questions, and of course, subscribe, which helps us out a lot. There is no shortage of stuff to talk about this week, Cole. As the BC Lions did some work in the Canadian and global CFL drafts, but in true CFL fashion, the league upstaged its own draft by announcing some major changes coming in 2027. We'll get into those as well a little bit later, but CFL fan community and the media community is losing its mind over some of these announcements, and we'll talk about that stuff in a little bit. We've got JC Abbott from 3 Down Nation coming on the show tonight. He did some fantastic work for 3 Down Nation. One of the best draft coverage shows I've seen. They went from start to finish, all 74 picks. Very informative, very intelligent commentary on all the picks. So well done to 3 Down Nation and JC and Ben Grant. That was spectacular.
It was a ton of fun to follow along throughout the night, especially when TSN Plus's draft coverage or supposed draft coverage did not come on. So shout out and kudos to both JC and Ben, especially for going 4.5 freaking hours. I mean, that is no easy feat. But as you mentioned, Brian, we have a ton to talk about. Definitely excited to get into it. Hoping to get a few people's opinions into the chat. But as you mentioned, in true CFL fashion, it's Tuesday, and I'm all excited for the draft at work. And then we get this bombshell that there's this big announcement at 11 a.m. and kind of took over the day, I feel like, for the rest of the day until the draft, of course. But we got some stuff to talk about. So excited, Brian, and excited to get into it, as the season will be right around the corner pretty much after the draft.
What were your initial thoughts on the Lions draft?
I would say I was pretty satisfied. I know I was pretty public on social media, Twitter specifically, of wanting to see the Lions maybe grab an offensive lineman in their first 2 picks. They didn't do necessarily that, but I think especially with Nate DeMontignac, he was one of the receivers that I had my eye on. Hopefully the Lions drafting. So I like the idea of them kind of keeping their fastball, especially with Justin McInnis, Javon Cotoy being their 2 starters. So whether Nate slots in as one of the 5 starters or he's kind of a depth option to slot in when injury happens throughout a long 18-game season. Pretty happy with that. And then, of course, you kind of go down the draft as well, and we're able to add a pretty value add in Nick Senecal. So happy with that. As I mentioned, a little bit of pushback on the Elad pick. I'm actually kind of curious to see a little bit more if JC can maybe talk me into it a little bit more. But I was pretty satisfied overall, Brian, and was happy to get the draft kind of over with, because as I mentioned, after this, it's rookie camp next week, and the season really is here.
Yeah, I think when I looked at it, and I was watching JC and Ben talk about the draft at the beginning of the draft, they talked about how deep it was for offensive linemen this year. And so I was really hoping that the Lions would snag one of those guys, but they did need Canadian depth at receiver, and I think they got 2 of the top ranked receivers in the draft. So, you can't complain about that at all. Before we bring JC in, just some quick thoughts on those changes that were announced by the league. We're going to get into this with JC as well and get his opinion on it. I've been sitting on Twitter, or X, aka X. I still call it Twitter. I'm going to call it Twitter till the day I die. I've been getting into it with some people on Twitter. I'm one of the few, I think, that are in the camp that I don't mind this. I really don't mind it. Look, I've been a fan of this. I've been a season ticket holder for coming up 24 years now. Been a fan for almost 50 years. This league has done basically nothing for the last 2 decades, and maybe even longer. They lost a whole generation of fans. I am encouraged to see a commissioner come in and want to try new things. And I know that he's not everybody's cup of tea, and I know his communication is poor at times. His messaging is poor at times. But when you do nothing, don't expect anything to change. And I think this helps the players. I think it helps the owners. I think it helps the clubs make more money. And how many times over the years have we had people say, well, the CFL needs to find more revenue for the players. The CFL players need to be paid more. They're making an effort to do that. And this is all TV driven. It's revenue driven. It's great for the fans. We get more football. The CFL PA has signed off on it. There's a whole bunch of reasons why this does make sense. Now, are 8 of 9 teams making the playoffs every year great? No, but maybe we have 10 teams in a few years, and maybe 12 teams, and maybe that makes a little more sense and looks the optics of that are a little better. So those are my initial thoughts on it. We can get into all the little finer details of it a bit later, and I especially want to hear JC's thoughts on it. But what were your initial thoughts on the playoffs?
Yeah, I'll keep it short, Brian, because as you mentioned, I'm interested to hear. Well, I know JC's thoughts already, but you said it really wonderfully. I kind of agree with most of what you said. Unfortunately, as we talked about before we went live, a lot of fans kind of, you know, correlating this to like the CFL selling their soul for a buck. And I know optically it looks not the greatest with 8 out of 9 teams making the playoffs, but as you mentioned, just I think overall, hopefully they'll benefit the CFL long term down the road.
Yeah, for sure. The other announcement, of course, was the season being moved up, starting on Victoria Day weekend, which is great. It makes I don't know if it makes it a little shorter off season, but this time next next year we'll be, or in 2027, we'll be looking for start of the season pretty soon.
Yeah, I don't mind. That was another one of the perks, right? Kind of like building around summer football, Canadian fans being out in the nice weather, the long weekends, that sort of stuff. So I don't mind that. And of course, they kind of pitched as well, like the earlier Grey Cup, it being kind of early November. So it'll be interesting. I know the one other weird thing next year that the CFL draft will take place before the NFL draft, so that'll have some implications for CFL front offices and whatnot. But super interested to hear JC, because I know he's probably on the other side of the spectrum.
All right, well, let's bring him in now. JC is in our green room, so let's bring him up and let's get started. Oh, good. Well, we'll mix up the windows a little bit there. JC, welcome back to the podcast. First of all, congratulations on a great draft show you guys did. I know how much work you put into that, and it just wasn't that week. You guys have been working on this for months now and watching a lot of game film. So I think on behalf of all CFL fans, thank you very much for your efforts on that. It was much appreciated.
I really appreciate the kind words. It's a labor of love, and I'm glad that there was somebody out there watching. Hundreds of hours go into that, and that's simply the culmination. So, really fulfilling when you get to hear the kind words from fans and players and parents of players who tuned into the broadcast, and that was the way that they found out, that their son was getting picked by this team or that franchise. It's really great to hear, and we're happy to deliver it and shine a spotlight on these young players.
JC, before we get into, we're not going to make you go through all 74 picks. Don't worry, we're not going to sit here for 4 hours again, but we want to recap the BC Lions picks with you, of course. And first of all, what do you think the Lions, how do you think the Lions did in the draft? Do you think they addressed some needs, or do you think they were mainly picking the best player available?
I think they did a solid job overall. It looks like a solid combination of the two strategies, right? They didn't necessarily just go pure best player available. I think they had some priorities and some guys that they had penciled in that they really wanted to get their hands on. But at the same time, I don't think they reached for really any of these prospects. And yes, you can nitpick with some of the strategies. And I know I've expressed some trepidation about the fact that they didn't get a premier offensive lineman either. And I would have been a little bit more aggressive personally to do that. But this is a team that frankly plans to start 2 Canadians on the offensive line. They'd be comfortable going with just 1 Canadian on the offensive line if they absolutely have to. And I think their overall sentiment was, unless it's going to be the guy that we really want, and potentially that person wasn't available when they were picking, then we may have to cut whichever player comes in, and we don't want to be in a situation like that. So they weren't going to stockpile offensive linemen for the sake of stockpiling offensive linemen. They were going to address other needs on their football team and take other players that they felt could come in and contribute right away. And if that was the mission, I think it was very well accomplished, because I see a vision for all of these guys that the Lions picked, and I see clear ways that they'll be able to contribute for this football team.
Okay, well, we want to start. We'll go through the picks here one by one and just get your comments on that particular player. We'll start with their 7th overall pick, Nate Dimatagnak out of North Dakota. Good football school, has produced players for the Canadian Football League like Weston Dressler, Scott Schultz, and of course Brady Oliveira. Your thoughts on that pick? Maybe drafted a little higher than most had him, but when I listened to you thought he was a pretty CFL ready player.
Mm. Yeah, it's a balance with a guy like Dimatagnak, because yes, it might be a little bit high based on where your board stacks him best player available, but I think the gap in receiving ability between him and the next best receiver is fairly significant. This was really the only guy in the entire draft class at that position that I could circle gold star and say, hey, this is a future starter in the CFL, and I'm fairly confident he's got that skill set across the board to do it. I think the Lions felt the same way. This was somebody that they had prioritized, that multiple people in their building wanted to go out and get, because they feel that, he's got the fluid movement skills that succeeds in this league. He's got the speed to pull away. And for a guy who's only 188 pounds, he's very physical. He's great at the catch point, and he will get his nose dirty as a blocker. That endears him to pro football coaches. I think this is a Buck Pierce guy, if you've ever seen one. And the depth behind Justin McInnes and Javon Catoy, with all due respect to Kieran Poissant, who has punched well above his weight class as a guy coming out of junior football the last couple of years, has been lacking. It's no longer lacking when you add Nate Dimatagnak. I think he is automatically the 3rd Canadian receiver. I think I'd be comfortable with him on the field right away this season if a guy went down with injury. And certainly when you look at what those receivers are being paid across the market right now, when you're going to get into a situation where Justin McInnes gets a little bit older and is asking for a little bit more, Dimatagnak on a cheap rookie deal in a year or two is going to look pretty attractive. I believe he's going to make an impact for the Lions going forward.
Strong special teams resume as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, very solid player all around. He can do whatever you ask him to, and he's willing to do it physically. There are some good special teams receivers in this draft, but the combination between that skill set and him actually being able to do the things you need at the receiver position, there just wasn't anybody who had that perfect combination besides him this year.
Yeah, JC, I was pretty thrilled with the Dimatagnak pick, especially considering if it wasn't going to be an offensive lineman, receiver would have been the position I wanted them to go. But as I mentioned with 15 and Jet Elad, maybe give us a little bit about Jet and kind of the player that he brings, but maybe I guess maybe me specifically into the pick, because I know obviously first and foremost he isn't healthy and he's probably going to be out for, I believe Riggs said maybe to July or August, which is obviously another bummer. And then I feel like it's already kind of at a position that's filled up on the roster with guys like, obviously I believe he was kind of comp to like a Patrice Rene type. Obviously Finley kind of broke out last year. You have a Boyu coming back from IR hopefully at some point. Haggerty's on the roster as well. So as I mentioned, maybe just give us a little bit about Elad and the player he is, and just kind of maybe more talking me into the pick as well.
Well, first of all, the Lions love Jet Elad as a person from a character perspective, and he was somebody that they coveted very highly in that area of team building as well. And when you look at not just projecting him this season, to be entirely frank, even if he comes back in August, I'm not expecting to hear Jet Elad's name called a ton in 2026. I think we're thinking about this player long term. But in 2027 and beyond, if we look at the projections for that position of strength, really, with the BC Lions and what they've been able to do there, Patrice Rene is not getting any younger. I think you need somebody who's a Canadian, who's versatile enough to play that nickel position. Jet Elad fits that bill there and can slot in at any spot in the secondary. And as deep as they are at safety with both Jackson Findlay and Christophe Beaulieu there in the building, this is a contract year for Christophe Beaulieu. And if you've already got Jackson Findlay, are you going to be able to hang on to both those guys? I'm not sure you can. So Jet Elad becomes immediately the built-in succession plan for the depth in the secondary so they can maintain the strength that they currently have. I think he's versatile enough and athletic enough to be an upgrade over Patrice Rene. I don't think you're going to have to hold your breath when you stick him out there in coverage. I don't like him as much as a free safety. I thought he missed some tackles when he was up high at Rutgers, but super experienced. And when you brought him down into the box, he's not afraid to get physical. He'll come down and he'll make tackles. He blocked some kicks on special teams. I think you're looking at an all-round versatile piece on the defense. That's always valuable when you're looking at Canadian content.
You made the comment on your draft show that he's been playing college football longer than you've been alive. Can you tell us a little bit about that story? And he ended up suing the NCAA to play in his senior year.
He did. Yeah, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. I was still at university when Jet Elad was getting started in his university career, and started at Ohio, played a lot in the slot there, had some promising seasons, went to JUCO for a year, and then UNLV, and that's when he really broke out with the Rebels, had some fantastic seasons, a couple of John Cornish Trophy finalist campaigns for a team that, if not for the Boise State Broncos, would have very much been in that college football playoff mix. Then transfers up to Rutgers, but the idea was he had used up all his eligibility in that JUCO season, like several other players like Diego Pavia. He went the lawsuit route, filed a court case against the NCAA, essentially arguing that JUCO eligibility shouldn't count against your college eligibility because they are separate governing bodies. He did not win that case, to be clear, but because it was ongoing, there was an injunction made. He was able to play the entire season for Rutgers, and that got him a full 7 years of NCAA play. So you're not going to find anybody with more experience and certainly not more production than Jet Elad, who has been a contributor from the very beginning of that process. He's seen it all. He's done it all. He's played several different positions in the secondary in different schemes and shown his versatility. I think that's a plus in a lot of ways. It's maybe also a minus in that he's a little bit older. There's a little bit more wear and tear. We're seeing that with the fact that he's just undergone hernia and hip surgery, and it's going to take him a little bit to be ready to go. But you're getting a more finished product with Jet Elad than you are with some of the other DBs available.
Lions kind of kept it all in the family, selecting Pierre Kemeny. I've got marble mouth right now. DB out of Ohio, cousin of Jet Elad. So that's kind of interesting. 6'1", 214-pound defensive back. Again, another defensive back. In an article on 3 Down Nation, they said that he would have been tied for first in the bench press among defensive backs in the 2025 Combine in Regina. He also could have placed 6th in the 40-yard dash. 6'1", 212-pound defender, projects as a safety, strong side linebacker or weak linebacker in the Canadian Football League. Played 190 snaps on special teams as well. So another kind of all-round player the Lions picked up in Kemeny.
Yeah, they project him as a weak side linebacker, is my understanding. He's got the girth for it. He's struggled to see the field in college as a corner. He's a little bit too stilted for it in his movement skills, tends to trip over his feet, but you can't teach the length. 34-inch arms, which is unbelievable. And, as a DB, you use that to break up passes. As a linebacker, you use it to get off blocks. And he's been very good on special teams across all his college stops. And there have been a number of them, Texas State, New Mexico, Ohio twice, in JUCO. He's had a long and circuitous journey, but through it all, throughout the entire thing, he has been effective on special teams, and that's where you're going to see Pierre Kameni shine. You just don't have other body types like that available.
Okay, JC. So in the 5th round, obviously the Lions double dip with receiver and go with Nick Senecal, a guy that had been talked about fairly highly through the draft process, and was kind of, I don't know if I want to say consensus, but probably would have been looked at, especially with like all the mock drafts pre-draft, to go probably a lot higher than the 5th round. Can you maybe fill us in on maybe like what were some of the issues of why he maybe dropped in terms of whether it was character? Obviously, I think Riggs mentioned today that he was kind of like one of our guys, and they liked the character of Senecal. So maybe just why he dropped, and then just a little bit more about the player.
To me, he drops because of the physical measurables that he was putting up at his pro day and at the CFL combine. Runs in the mid 4.7s at his pro day for Hawaii, and then comes to the CFL combine essentially under the auspices of improving those times because they were so poor, and runs slower. He runs a 4.79. That is just not a time that you expect to see from a starting caliber receiver in the CFL. But I think there's more to the story there with Nick Senecal. He was never a Blazer, don't get me wrong, but this was a kid who in 2024 led Hawaii in receiving yards. He was an incredibly effective player for the Rainbow Warriors, and I think would have been again this past season, but suffered a knee injury that was supposed to be season ending, and he could have taken a medical red shirt and gone back to school for another year. He opted not to. He forced himself to come back late in the year. He battled through that injury. I think it resulted in some drops, some fumbles, some bad mistakes as he was pushing through it, and also because there was some quarterback change at the University of Hawaii. But even at the end of the season in their bowl game, he caught the winning touchdown. Like, this was a guy who was still productive when he had to be. And he has that CFL skill set of being able to win in the short areas and win with understanding of space. You saw it with, Samuel Ellis. You saw it with the Philpott brothers. He's not quite as fast as them in the testing, but if you assume that knee is holding him back a little bit, maybe that's a player who can be in that mold, or at least something similar to it in the future. When you're that late in the draft and you have somebody with that level of production and pedigree, like, it's a win-win in my estimation. You're not putting up much risk at all, and the upside is huge to get a guy who potentially, if everything goes right, can prove himself to be a starting receiver once again in this league.
Clutch receiver. Well, had the game-winning catch in his final game as a college player in the bowl game there. Round 6, 54th overall, the Lions finally did pick an offensive lineman, Ethan Graham, out of Regina. Draft that was supposed to be deep in offensive linemen. They waited till the 6th round to pick one up. 6'7", 315 pounds, so he's a big boy. What can you tell us about him? He did start for tackle in his 3rd season and was a Canada West All-Star in 2025.
Yeah, started at left tackle for the Regina Rams. Really solid player. Has that prototypical frame that you want to see. I don't think he has the feet to stay at tackle at the CFL level. He's not particularly nimble in that way, but very solid and reliable as a leverage blocker. I think you project him inside to guard very soundly. I'd like to see him get a little bit nastier. I think I'd like to see him play a little bit lower as well. That's probably why he fell as far as he did. But certainly somebody who's going to contribute to that offensive line depth, with a former teammate of his in Colton Clausen as well, or Connor Clausen, I should say.
Yeah.
I'm confusing him with the former Regina running back.
With the amount of prospects that you have in your brain, JC, there is no harm done, buddy.
So he's got a former teammate already in the building. I think those guys will compete for a depth role. I don't know that I project him as a CFL starter anytime soon, but it's good to have those quality depth pieces in the building, and he was the best lineman available at that stage in the draft.
Yeah, JC, you talked about not wanting to force offensive linemen due to the fact that they just might not have enough spots. Obviously, you look at the offensive line, the 5 starters you probably have somewhat solidified. Then you have obviously your 6 reserve guys, Andrew Pearson, that's kind of been your old reliable over the last almost a decade. And when you come to, roster spots and dressing guys on game day, are you kind of satisfied with where the Canadian depth is on the offensive line when you look at, as you mentioned, guys like Connor Klassen, Alex Berwick, who they drafted last year? I believe that'll be it. Other than Ethan Graham, there'll be a few other guys maybe in there. Shout out to Caden Kerntoff. Obviously got the invite to rookie camp as well. But are you satisfied? As we kind of all mentioned, we were hoping for the Lions to maybe pick an offensive lineman a little bit earlier, especially without having a third round pick.
I'm not particularly satisfied with that depth right now, and I think this is a make or break year for Anu Unga, who they took in the first round 2 years ago. Didn't play much as a rookie, got thrust into that starting role last year. I didn't think he looked at all like the player that I saw on tape at the University of Windsor. Now it's going to be, did he make the adjustments? Can he make that next step? Because if not, I don't know that he'll be a BC Lion beyond this next season. And certainly somebody who's going to have to battle for a job in training camp this year. Now, the Lions are comfortable with the pieces they have around and their ratio flexibility overall, that nobody's panicking about the lack of offensive line depth. But for me, sustainably long term, you need to have more guys in house. Now, I do understand some of the logic behind why they didn't want to reach. They didn't have several of those guys valued in that second round range, and the lack of a third round pick. They wanted to get their hands on Elad and de Montignac. That was their guys. They didn't want to force a selection. I understand that logic. I think there was also some concern about, some of the guys that did get picked, whether they were raw projects like Nicholas Henning or somebody like Jonathan Dennis, who has an injury history, why you maybe don't force a trade up to get one of those guys because you're worried about the potential downsides there. And then some of the other futures picks. This Lions team, if you look at their history, have actually tried to address that offensive line with a number of high draft picks over the last couple of years. It just so happens that they're all starting in the NFL, right? They took a swing on Alaric Jackson years ago when it looked like nobody in the NFL wanted him. Well, now he's making tens of millions of dollars as a franchise left tackle for the Los Angeles Rams. They took a swing on Theo Benedict when it wasn't clear whether he was going to get a legit shot in the NFL. Now he's starting games for the Chicago Bears. That's not the BC Lions' fault, right? They've made those attempts, and I think when you look at the futures like an Albert Reese or a Kevin Klein, you may be worried that you're going to be in another Alaric Jackson or Theo Benedict situation. So why would you gamble a premier pick on somebody like that? You let somebody else take the risk. You take the guys that you trust and you build your roster in a different way. I would have gone in a different direction, but I can understand the logic that the Lions had behind these moves.
Even a guy like Brett Boyko, who they drafted and spent a long time down in the NFL, not even really playing. But, by the time he got up to the Canadian Football League, he had a tough time adjusting to it. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but when you look at the offensive linemen that they brought in as free agents, do you know anything about some of these guys? And if the Lions are kind of high on any of those guys that they brought into training camp this year?
Oh, in terms of the free agents, I'm not sure that I would be able to give an assessment on their stock. I think there's some interesting things in terms of Isaiah Cage, what he's done in the league in the past. I like Tyron Hunt, what I saw from him last year when he was on the practice roster. I think Brandon Yates showed some flashes. There's some intriguing guys, but where they exactly see them, I don't have the secret sauce in terms of where they're penciling each of them in.
What can you tell us about 63rd overall pick in the 7th round, Chase Henning out of UBC, staying in their own backyard there, 6'2", 215 pounds, native of Salmon Arm. What can you tell us about him and how he projects? Because a lot of what I've read seems to me like he might be a special teams player mainly.
Yes, he's a special teams demon. Second team All-Canadian on special teams in 2024. So one of the best in the country at covering kicks. Played some on defense for the UBC Thunderbirds. I didn't think he was particularly mobile. laterally on defense, had some stiffness there. But if you want this guy to fly downhill and tackle a returner, there's few people better than Henning. That's going to give you a path onto the roster. They took guys like Terrence Gagne in a similar mold in past years, and we've seen that they've been able to stick and contribute to this football team. I think Henning is going to challenge Gagne. He's going to challenge Maxime Royer. Pierre Kameni is going to challenge everyone as well. Those two guys are your special teams demons and your core pieces in that phase.
Yeah, and then what was this last pick? I believe, is that correct there, Brian?
Yep, that's the last one.
Forgive me, JC. I'm actually going to turn this over to you, and you tell me how to pronounce the 8th round pick.
I believe it's Ebenezer Debula out of Kennesaw State, the defensive tackle. This is a nice late round flyer to me, a classic low floor, high ceiling type of guy. He hasn't really put it all together. He was at Bethune-Cookman, then Kennesaw State, sort of raw, chaotic at times, doesn't attack with a plan, but runs a 4.9 40 at, over 280 pounds. You can't teach speed like that at that size. Raw and powerful. He was knocking guys back into the quarterback at the CFL Combine. He just doesn't know how to get off the block or how to use his hands to disengage at this stage. If you can teach him how to do that, I think there's tremendous physical upside with Ebenezer Debula. The question is he going to be able to learn that? Because he hasn't done it to this stage at some pretty high-level college programs. That's always a risk, but in the 8th round, you're playing with house money, and you've got a potential high upside guy late in the draft.
Got a good defensive line coach with Randy Melvin too that can maybe get some of those traits you're talking about up to par.
Absolutely, a veteran guy who's been there, who's seen it all. I'm sure Ebenezer Debula is going to be put through a crash course in training camp, and there's some need along that defensive line in the interior. In my mind, Nathan Cherry has been around for a number of years as a former first-round pick. I don't know that he's fully panned out the way the Lions initially hoped. Christian Covington, as fantastic a human being as he is, has not necessarily lived up to the expectations after coming back from the NFL. If Ebenezer Debula can show some flashes and some promise, there's potential opportunities to get into that rotation as a Canadian defensive tackle.
JC, before we move off the draft, I'm curious if you can maybe kind of let us a little peek behind the curtain, if you will, like how you go through the draft process, because you have, I'm sure, whatever your board is, whether it's 100 and 150 guys that you scout or whatever, you go to all these different showcase bowls, you go to the combines and whatnot. So you have a lot of stuff to balance. Obviously, when you go to these combines, you only have 2 eyes. So you're having to use, whether it's Hodge or whoever's there to kind of get some intel for guys that they're watching. And kind of like, for example, like, do you watch a prospect and then kind of close the book on him and move on to the next guy? Or are you continuing to add notes on prospects? And just kind of take us through your process. Because as I believe you said on whatever I know you've been busy, whether it's, I think 2 and Out or Flight Deck. You mentioned like basically after Grey Cup, you don't really take a break and you jump right into draft coverage. And essentially that's when your prep begins until the draft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my process really begins in earnest when I go to College Career and Showcase in January every year. There's typically, between 12 and 15 Canadians down there who are draft eligible. I get a chance to sit with them, interview all those guys, have long conversations, view them against American competition, get some assessment, and I do prep in advance of that event. But until that point in the year, it's really all about the season all the time. And while I've been tracking the Americans to the NCAA and I watch U Sports Football, really drilling down into the draft can't happen until we're in the off season. So the College Ground Showcase is my big introduction. And then it's taking the massive draft eligible list, which can be upwards of 600 names, and whittling it down to the guys who are still active playing or who have performed at a very high level at some point in their career, and then either adding a guy to the list or eliminating him based on certain traits. And I try and watch a little bit of film on everybody. I try and watch a lot of film on the top guys available. My access to it is obviously limited depending on the level of competition. I don't have the same access as the teams do, certainly with the lower level NCAA guys. Even, when it comes to some of the AUS players in Canada, it's going to differ a little bit. But then I get live exposures at the CFL Combine as well. I'm able to get eyes on those guys. We split up the task. We try and film some of the things so we can review it after the fact. You talk to the scouts, and you start compiling notes. And I really like to watch the guys when I finally do my rankings in position group. So I'm watching apples to apples. Here's how I stack them out at running back. Here's how I stack them out at offensive line. I'm watching them all in a big group. I may have notes on those guys prior going in. I may have initial impressions on them that I've jotted down or expectations for them. But that's really when I'm sliding guys up and down my board and fleshing out my notes into full paragraphs for each player. And I think I ranked almost 150 this year within articles. I probably have notes on another 50 more, just because I like to have at least a sentence or two jotted down for anybody that might have the slimmest shot of getting drafted. I've been burned before by the guy that comes out of nowhere. Thankfully, this year I was able to identify all 74 picks correctly, but my board is actually much larger than the boards of most CFL teams, who are each going to take different approaches, but they may have as few as 74 players on their draft board, and they've whittled it right down to that. I don't have that luxury because I have to theoretically draft for every single team and engage in every level of risk assessment that a team might be willing to take on, whether it's a guy who has severe legal issues. Maybe there's another Chris Jones out there who'll take a shot on somebody like that, or somebody who's going back to school, somebody who didn't play the last season, like a receiver like Ben Britton, who we saw get picked by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Most people wouldn't have him on their board. I've got to make sure I've got those guys covered. So it's an extensive process. It's months in the making, and it's a sprint to the finish for the last couple of weeks before the CFL draft. And then I have to come up for air, and I go immediately on vacation before training camp.
Let's just touch on the global draft here, if we could. What can you tell us about the Lions' 2 picks? First of all, they took a punter out of Australia, Brett Thorson, and then in the second round of that draft, Sadie Traore out of Mississippi State. What can you tell us about those 2 guys? Both of them, we should mention, are starting their careers in the NFL.
Yeah, these are lottery picks essentially for the Lions, and the reason why is the global program is a little bit hamstrung right now because you're only allowed to play 2 guys. You can't play more than that. And if you're the BC Lions, you're not unseating Carl Meyer. He's one of the best punters in the league, and you don't really have a ton of interest in unseating Thibaut Dubai because he has been a valuable part of your defensive rotation, and you really trust that guy now for a number of years. And it was difficult for the Lions even last season when Maxime Rouillet, who now has been granted national status, was still a global, because you couldn't get those guys on the field at the same time. So you're having to one game somebody who you really wanted on your roster. The Lions don't want to be in that circumstance or have to force a guy to go on the practice roster. Then they decide to leave the team and you can't keep them around. That's a waste of a draft pick. So their strategy for the last number of years has been, who's the highest upside players possible? Let's just grab their rights. And with Brett Thorson, you have a player who arguably was the best punter in the NFL draft. I know some guys got picked ahead of him, but he gets signed right away as a UDFA with the Minnesota Vikings. I think he's got a astounding leg. He would be a huge signing for the Lions if he ever came north. And then Sadie Traore, who was a 5th-round pick of the Miami Dolphins. And when you talk about him, this is a unicorn. This is a guy at 6'4", 244 pounds, who is probably more athletic than any receiver in the CFL, runs blazing fast, jumps 40 inches in the vertical, was a genuine receiving threat that could be moved all around the offense at Mississippi State and at his prior stops as well, you're not looking at him as just a pure tight end if he comes to the CFL. I think you're seeing him as Javon Katoy on steroids. Like, this is a guy who has that body type with twice the athletic ability, and that's with no disrespect to Javon Katoy, because he's a very good athlete who's gotten NFL looks in the past as well. Traore is otherworldly in those ways. So you're expecting him to stick in the NFL for multiple years as a result. He will have the ability to be used as that IPP exemption where he could stick on the practice roster at essentially no cost to an NFL team for a number of years if they wanted to develop him. But if you get lucky, if your number comes up on the mega ball jackpot, I mean, he could be one of the top weapons in the CFL overnight because of his athletic ability. That's why you take a pick like that, because you can't get a guy on the roster right now. So why not try and get the best guy possible in 2 or 3 years?
All right, Brian, are we going to talk about these rules, I guess, now? Transition away from the drafts? Or I guess we'll technically, JC, we won't transition right away, I guess. But my first question to you with these rules, and then you can kind of go on, or Brian can step in here. But I'm curious, with us talking about the draft, how this is going to impact it moving forward, obviously, with all the offseason dates and whatnot moving up. The CFL draft next year will be before the NFL draft. So obviously, CFL teams and front office will have to navigate even more difficult, where they're kind of already doing so with, like, hey, some of these guys that are getting rookie minicamp invites, although it's nothing guaranteed, like, how high do we kind of prioritize drafting them? Same with the guys that are UDFAs. Now it's even more because you have no idea what's happening. So how difficult would that be to navigate, and kind of walk us through that, I guess?
It's going to be a bit of a logistical nightmare. And I think the smallest portion of it is actually assessing, okay, which guys are going to get NFL interest? Where am I going to go with my draft picks? I think CFL teams are going to be able to figure that out. They can use their resources and the people they know in the NFL to make educated guesses. Generally, we know the guys who are going to get NFL opportunities before they get NFL opportunities, even if we might not know the exact specifics and the exact destinations. So you can make those educated guesses, and CFL teams have for many, many years in the past drafted blindly. It's not unfamiliar to them. That used to be how the draft worked overall. So I have some concerns there, but not an abundance of concerns. The bigger thing is after you pick them, because anybody who's got an NFL minicamp opportunity is not going to be there for the majority of training camp, if not any of training camp, under the new timing and model. That's incredibly difficult because you're talking about guys who are generally at the top of the draft if you're an NFL minicamp guy, so a first or second round pick, and you're going to have to build your roster and find a spot for a guy who, you know, doesn't know your playbook yet, hasn't been practicing with your team. Like, how do you find that spot on the roster? Because you can't put him on PR because another team will poach him. It's going to put teams in a really difficult spot when assessing their talent, because they can't have those guys in training camp. And I think it's going to have a negative effect on those guys as well in terms of their development. They may not be as ready to go early on. And if you go a step beyond that, even your average U Sports guys who are your 5th and 6th round picks who have no dreams of the NFL whatsoever, well, they may still be in exams for school at the start of training camp. They're not wrapped up yet. And there's genuine concern from teams across the league that they're going to be missing the majority of their draft classes for the start of training camp, and for not an insignificant portion of it, because these guys do have to take care of what their life is going to be like after football. So that's going to add another layer of logistical challenge. And on top of that, well, guess where these teams typically have done training camp? Well, it's university campuses, right? Because the dorms are available to them. That will not be the case when students are still in the buildings and still finishing up their exams. Those rooms are going to be occupied. So you've got a whole other logistical challenge on the, you know, the business side of things to find the accommodations for 100+ individuals for training camp, because you're not going to have your tried and true method of just renting out a university dorm anymore.
Just a quick note on training camp, and I want to go back to Jet Elad for a minute. If he's not going to be ready till July or August, how do the Lions handle that situation? Obviously, he can't participate in camp. What list does he go on? Is it like a suspended list? Is it an injury list? Is it how do they work that?
It's not a major concern for a draft pick coming in injured because he's a non-counter already. So he's not going to count against your quota until you go to your cut down day to get to your final roster. And then at that point, he can be put on the 6-game injured list. So it's not like an injured veteran where you just have, 2 injured veteran spots. And if they're not on that list, they're counting against your total. He's a non-counter already. Now, the other wrinkle in CFL roster building is in recent years, the CFLPA cracked down and they made it so that the guys who are going back to school and are not available or for the season, right? They are no longer non-counters for their second training camp. So you are going to see some guys who don't even get signed out of a draft class anymore because teams want to sort of reserve that non-counter if they know that player is going back to school. And I think you could use the same strategy with an injured guy. I know some teams have done that, did that last year as well. That won't be the case for Jet Elad because he's got nowhere else to go. He's got no eligibility. This is not like a Nick Weeb where you can send him back to Saskatchewan and he can sit around in his dorm room rehabbing instead of being with the team. He's burnt it all out and then some. So you want him in your building, but not a major concern because of the non-counter situation. You're not going to be hurt by his injury, essentially.
All right, let's get into these rules now, or the playoffs. We've talked enough about rules. I've been getting into it with people on X. I'm kind of in the camp. I feel like I'm in the minority here, but I really don't think this is such a bad idea. League's been stagnant for a long time. Not many changes, evolutions. They're trying different things, and I think they need to be commended by that. Is their messaging always on brand? No. They need to be better relaying this stuff. They certainly shouldn't have been announcing it on draft day. 8 of 9 teams, not a great look. I get that. But I think they're trying to change things up, and I think they need to be commended for that. I do see a lot of positive things that can come out of this. I like the fact that if you're first or second, you might get 2 chances to get to the Grey Cup instead of, just the one and done and you're one win and you're in the Grey Cup. I think it should be a little tougher to get to a championship game. And I know that's tougher with only 6 teams. There's only so much you can do with that. So what are your thoughts on it initially? What do you think the league has done right here, and what do you think they've done wrong?
Yeah, I've been vocal about the fact that I'm not necessarily a fan of the new playoff format, but I'll start with the positive. I do think they've correctly identified a way that they're going to make money, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that can be dismissed. If your goal is to gain revenue, they've done that, right? This is going to be, at least in the short term, very successful for them. The teams themselves are going to make more money because there's more playoff games that they can host, and that's a big boost to their coffers. It's going to be extremely profitable from a television broadcast standpoint, I believe. I think it's going to add a significant chunk of change to that new deal, which should be coming down the pipe in the near future. All of those things are positives. And when you're a league that has struggled to find a way to grow revenue and has been stagnant in that way, well, there's a valid reason why you would go down that path. Now, I am not in the camp that thinks that this is somehow going to make the regular season more impactful. I understand that there will be seeding battles throughout, but I think there's nuances here in terms of that first round. And, is it really that much better to be the first seed when the second seed can still earn a bye and win on the road? I mean, we're talking about extending the season by another game. Does that not put more emphasis on trying to keep your guys healthy. If you know that you're already going to have a shot at the bye, you just have to do it on the road instead of at home. Are you not more willing to rest your starters? And if you're in third place, as much as that battle for a bye in the showdown is huge, well, you're already hosting a playoff game. So do you want to go and be on the road to start initially? I mean, there's all sorts of little wrinkles that I'm not sure exactly how teams will handle there, but I'm not convinced that those seeding battles are going to be as compelling as people think they're going to be. And I think overall, you're going to degrade your product in the regular season, because I think the average person who goes into a CFL stadium is not going to be aware of the nitty gritty of whether the team's in first, second, third, or fourth. They're going to know, has this team clinched? Is there anything on the line whatsoever? And when you've got teams clinching early because 8 teams are going to make the playoffs, I think the overarching feeling in the poor weather months, or the months when it's more difficult to get in the stadium in September and October, is, well, I'll just wait until that playoff game. They're going to get in anyway. I don't necessarily have to go out there right now. And that's a real risk for me. On the other hand, I also think that this is bad optically in a massive way for the CFL. I don't think it can be understated. And it flies in the face of everything that Stuart Johnston said when he brought out the new rules. And we can debate the rules themselves as well. And there are people in favor and people against. But one of the talking points that he said at that podium was, we're going to remove the things that people think make the CFL look ridiculous, right? The goalpost at the front of the end zone, it's a laughing stock for your casual sports viewer. It's an easy reason why they're not tuning in. Let's just take it away. We'll take away the cheap shots and we'll be better because of it. Well, I don't know about you guys, but when I talk to people who don't watch the CFL and who have a low opinion of it, one of the things that they consistently say to me is, oh, it's only a 9-team league and 6 teams make the playoffs. Well, you have added fuel to that fire, not just fuel, significant fuel to that fire for those people. I think you've made the league look bad. You've undermined its integrity and its standing everywhere. And yes, that may earn you dollars and cents in the short term right now. I just worry about the long-term damage that sort of label that you're now placing on the CFL, that it's a Mickey Mouse league where everybody makes the playoffs essentially, and you can win the Grey Cup as a 3-win football team. Like, that is hard to shake. And when you're trying to change perceptions about the professionalism of your league and the quality of the product, I think that does a lot more harm than it does good.
Yeah, I think the bummer thing, JC, is like, for Brian and I specifically, that kind of are on the other side of this, is like, I feel like I can speak for Brian for a second. Like, we definitely hear all the arguments against it, and definitely makes sense. For me, the biggest bummer is just kind of like the like one step forward, like a little bit of positivity, and the 2 steps back, of like how they first announce it on draft day, hours before the draft. When talking about the draft, like, obviously you guys had the whole draft tracker incident. They kind of talked about, Stuart Johnson talked about kind of like fixing that and making sure it never happened again. And of course it does. But with that said, and talking about the changes, how do you navigate, like, for, I guess I'm more speaking like for the casual fans, for me specifically, like playing junior football, and say of like the 54 guys that are on a roster, I would say like 40 of them probably aren't watching the CFL during the regular season. More specifically, there'll probably be, maybe a handful of guys that will start during the playoffs, specifically just because of, it's playoff football. How do you navigate, like, maybe the casual fan having one more week to kind of tune in, where, viewership is almost doubled across TSN for, playoff games and stuff like that, where you're going to have a whole month to kind of roll out, hopefully, playoff football to the casual fan, where they're all excited. And I know it's kind of unfortunate to put it that way, because it's like, well, yeah, you are kind of dumbing down the regular season. I understand that, but for the odd fan that does come across, playoff football and they are excited because, as we know, TSN starts to hype it up a little bit more, and you're starting to see the commercials and all that stuff. So how do you navigate that? And do you think that can kind of maybe somewhat be a positive?
Yeah, I think it's a valid point, and I think it will be a positive. I just don't know that it's going to, in the long run, offset what you're losing on the back end of the regular season. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people will still be even more invested in the regular season, and these seeding battles become much more than I could possibly imagine. But if you're degrading your regular season product, that's the bulk of your revenue, right? As much as the playoffs are a huge windfall and you've got more eyeballs and it sends viewership through the roof and it's great to maximize that, well, you still have 18 other games and they have to matter in order to get butts in seats so you don't have empty stadiums. And if you degrade your regular season and people are less interested in that, I think you eventually degrade your playoffs too, because you're having less engaged fans overall and people are see the product in a less positive light. So it's going to be a give and take. I'll be interested to see how teams handle it. Now, to your point, with 8 teams making the playoffs, I've been told that CFL teams are going to have a much easier job selling playoff tickets. We may see more fans in attendance, bigger shows, more bells and whistles as a result of that move. That's not something I had initially considered at all, and I think that's a valid point. But I do think it's going to come at the cost of the regular season. You're pulling out of one pot to put in another, and that other pot may be more profitable, but at the end of the day, it's the leg that the pot is standing on that's being rotted.
Yeah, I just got a couple comments, and I think you mentioned casual fans. I'll be completely honest here. When I look around a football crowd at BC Place these days, there's not a lot of hardcore football people there. Not yet. They're building it, and they're trying to get youth in there, and maybe one day they'll be hardcore football fans. But I don't think that impact on the casual fan is going to be as big as some people think it's going to be, because I think a lot of the casual fans are just there for a night out. They're not season ticket holders. They don't come week after week after week. So there's that point. The other point is, as far as resting players, we have that now in the Canadian Football League. In the last few seasons, we've had teams that have gone into the final couple weeks of the seasons, rest their starters at the expense of other teams that are trying to make the playoffs that need them to win that game. So we also have teams we also have people clamoring for one division. And I've heard people say, well, what if you end up with Toronto and Hamilton in the Grey Cup? I'm not going to go to that. Well, what would be the difference with one division? Like, you're going to end up with that kind of situation eventually. And as far as a 3-15 team winning the Grey Cup, I just don't see it happening. They've got to win 3 games on the road against teams that are generally much better than them. And I know it's any given Sunday and all that kind of stuff, but like, to win 3 games on the road against teams that have been better than you all season, I just don't see it happening.
To me, it just takes so much of the incentive out of being a better football team out of it, though. And I know, I think you count yourself in this category, Brian, as somebody who never liked the fact that you could win one game and go to the Grey Cup, right? That's, some people see that as a blight. To me, that's a positive. That means your regular season matters, right? You earn that right to have that easy path, and that's why you get to do it. Now that you have to win multiple games to be able to make it to the Grey Cup, that's a real disincentive of being the superior regular season team in my mind. And yeah, we already have teams resting their starters now. That's never ever going to change, right? But I think you are going to see potentially more teams go that route. And the reality is, when you're adding an extra game, you're adding an extra wear and tear. And are people going to want to see a matchup between, Chase Bryce and Josh Love in week 18 when it's the teams are set in the 2 and the 3 seed already, and there's nothing at stake? Like,
But the PA,
That to me
PA
is
has
the
been
risk.
involved in this decision as well, and they've
I,
agreed to it, and they were part of negotiating this. So
the PA is getting some nice things as a part of this deal. There's potentially some added roster spots that are going to come down the pipe. They're getting more playoff money. They love that for their members. I think the PA is maybe being a little monetarily focused instead of focused on player safety in this circumstance, because you are talking about a maximum 22 game season at this point. That's massive in any football league, and it's going to put more wear and tear on these players' bodies, and there's going to be more injuries as a result. That's unavoidable, right? And you can say the money is potentially worth it. If this results in a massive TV deal, well, the players are going to profit from that too. And I think that's why they're going down that path. But I just wonder about some of the little nuances of these things and what it's going to do to the league's reputation long term.
Yeah. Brian, is that basically all? I had one more for JC before we maybe get out of it. I know you've been busy, JC, not trying to rush you out of here is all. But I wanted to ask you mentioned about kind of resetting after the draft and whatnot before the season. First of all, are we still coaching? And how's the team looking? Is it about springtime, I would think, no?
It's almost springtime. I'll be honest. Our program is a challenged one currently. It's going through a transition period, so I'm not sure what the future holds for us right now at the high school level. So there's some things still to be determined. Unfortunately, there on a personal level, I'm about to head on vacation. I'm going off to Ireland, so I'll get a couple of weeks of rest to sort of put my mind at ease. But we'll see what the future holds there. The boys fought hard last year, but it 17 guys on a football team, that's hard to be sustainable. I give all the kudos in the world to them, but we'll see what it looks like going forward.
Well, yes, as you know, alumni of NDSS, I know how the low numbers work for programs and them just battling year after year, man. So tip my cap to you guys first and foremost. Hopefully I see you guys on the field in fall, because obviously the more programs that stick around in BC, the better for the athletes growing up. But JC, well-earned vacation, man, because I'm sure I can speak for Brian. We've been following along all offseason with all the draft stuff and all the coverage you guys have been pumping out.
I appreciate you guys having me on and actually listening when I'm up there talking about these prospects, because there was a time when it was just shouting into the void. I've loved the support from everybody, and to shine a light on these guys is really what it's all about. They're getting a chance to live their dreams, and that's why it's my favorite part of the entire year.
All right, JC, thanks for sticking around with us for almost an hour now. JC Abbott at 3downnation.com, at the JC Abbott on Twitter. I'm gonna call it Twitter till the day I die. But thank you very much for joining us, and again, appreciation for all your hard work with this off season and informing CFL fans on the draft. Because I'll be the first to tell you, like I don't know anything about CFL draft prospects, and I rely on guys like you to show us the way. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right,
Later, JC.
take care. All right, that was JC Abbott of 3Down Nation. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. Make sure you check out 3Down Nation, because they have CFL and Canadian football articles daily, and they've really become a go-to source for Canadian football information in this country.
I mentioned how busy JC has been. He's been on, I believe, 2 and Out, Alouette's Flight Deck. I forget to mention First and Now.
BC Lions, yeah.
Yeah. Where I should have joked and called him, Biggs actually called him, I believe he called him Paul Bissonnette, or called him Biz, because he's been everywhere. He's been on all these appearances. But yeah, thank you to JC, as you kind of just mentioned there, Brian. He's been
well deserved, right? He put in the work, and we arranged this I think last week sometime, and then as the week was going on, I'm like, oh, JC Abbott's on this podcast, JC Abbott's on that podcast. I'm like, damn it, we should have done this earlier. Yeah. But anyway, well, he was covering the Lions for us, and that's all we really wanted to talk about. Final thoughts from you on the Lions draft, the global draft, anything you want to talk about before we head out of here?
Yeah,
anybody in the chat have some comments or questions that they want to get in before we get out of here for another week?
Yeah, I appreciate everybody that did contribute to the chat, but nothing really crazy, Brian. I don't need to beat a dead horse too much. Obviously, I think maybe for some casual CFL draft fans or CFL BC Lions draft fans, I should say, we're maybe a little bit disappointed with not taking an offensive lineman higher than the 6th round. But that being said, as JC kind of made the point of like, hey, you take an offensive lineman in the 1st, 2nd round, and he's not, say better than Andrew Pearson, Tyler Packer, he might not be on your roster. So is it worth it to force a pick like that? It makes sense that the Jet Eliud pick is definitely a little bit still, a future pick. So I understand that where maybe next year where, Christophe Boyu isn't on the roster, whoever it may be. But as I believe someone else mentioned as well, like a guy like Deontay Williams is also on the roster already, kind of solidified at nickel. So, and just weird things happen. As we talked about with JC now, it's going to be a 22 game regular season if you go all the way to the Grey Cup. So you're going to have depth. You're going to have depth that you rely on now that just can kind of get thrown into the fire and will sink. Can you put that depth in and kind of will they rise to the occasion or at least kind of maintain that same floor? So I'm excited though, Brian. As we talked about off camera before we got going here, the end of the CFL draft kind of signals like, hey, it's May now. May's going to kick off. You're going to have rookie camp here, I believe. What is it, next Wednesday? I believe the rookies report the rookies
May 8th,
first years. And then I believe the vets will trickle in there a few days afterwards, and that's where things will get going hot and heavy. I'm super excited about it. Brian and I will hopefully be back on a weekly basis, which is going to be even more exciting because that's the most exciting time of year when we're back every week talking BC Lions football. I'm sure we'll dabble in some CFL gossip and all that sort of stuff. So I'm excited. There's going to be some more content coming out from us as well. Congratulations, we already did on last show, but just it was made official that Caden Kerntoff and Colton Meikle, current Kamloops Bronco receiver, got the invite up to BC Lions rookie camp, so they'll be competing once again. And of course, keep an eye, folks. You never know where those roster spots could come from with guys in the past like a Kieran Passant that have come from BC Lions E camp, Jacob Bond like last year. So keep an eye on a guy like Caden Kerntoff. I'm complaining about no offensive lineman in the draft. Maybe they thought, hey, we have this guy in our back pocket. He's coming to rookie camp. Maybe he could be a future, rosterable guy that can come in, battle with the Alex Berwicks, the Ethan Grahams who we just drafted on this roster. So, and even a guy like Colton Meikle, who he's been to 3 BC Lions rookie camps. I believe he went all the way to training camp last year, played in the game down in Victoria. He's kind of a receiver by trade, but he's put on some weight this offseason. I believe he weighed in at 250 pounds at E camp. So they're maybe kind of wanting to cross train him at maybe like a, kind of like that fullback position. And they can have like that pipeline of, junior guys in the system of like, you have a Riley Pickett, you have a Jacob Bond. If anything were to happen to them, you have a guy like Colton Meikle who can kind of step up, be that weapon. But shout out to those guys. And then lastly, Brian, I have to give a nice big plug to the junior guys that are kicking off spring camp across the conference. The West Shore Rebels did last weekend. The Raiders and the Langley Rams will do so this weekend. So always just a reminder, especially when I'm talking to BC Lions kind of community of like, hey, if the Lions are staying on a bye week, they're playing on a Sunday, Friday. There's no place to get out that's better than some of those junior parks of consuming some of that football. And you never know, you could be watching the next future Lion.
Get to some questions here. Bearpaw Chris was a little late arriving to the show tonight, but he wanted to know how disappointed we were with the timing of the playoff change announcement. Yeah, we did touch on that. We right off the top, in typical CFL fashion, they put their foot in their mouth and ruined one of the biggest days of the year for them and for a lot of Canadian football players. And people were talking about the playoffs instead of the draft, which is unfortunate. So.
You could argue that CFL draft's the biggest day of the year when you think about CFL free agency. The opening of CFL free agency has been so dumbed down now because the communication window is truly kind of when the party starts, and it's not really played up by the CFL at all. It's really kind of just played up by guys like Farhan, guys like Dave that are reporting these things on Twitter, where it's not really this whole the draft's on TV. Even if you're a casual fan or even if you're a diehard CFL fan that doesn't know anything about prospects, you're paying attention to the draft. So it's like arguably the biggest day of your offseason. And it was, I don't want to say it was almost overshadowed, but it was a good portion of the draft was, like I said, leading up to the draft, instead of talking about the draft and the pre-coverage, it was all about the changes.
For those of you that don't know, I'm a Seahawks fan, and our friend Bryce here from the Hawkseye podcast. Make sure you follow him and check him out. He puts on a really good show. His draft stuff for the NFL and the Seahawks was absolutely amazing. So make sure you check out the Hawkseye podcast as well. We had a question from Blake. Our friend Blake was wondering what we thought of the Argos global draft pick. I think I know what he's referring to. There's some mention of him running into some assault charges or questionable behavior. I don't want to make any judgment because I don't know anything about it, to be honest. I just saw something about it today. I haven't really looked into it too much. I know, with the Chad Kelly thing and now they're taking another guy who has that kind of history. Whether they knew that or not is another thing. I don't want to form any judgments on it until the facts come out. But he's a global draft pick and he may never play for them anyway. So
yeah. I'm going to reiterate that, Brian. I actually had no idea what Blake was referring to, but I'm just going to not comment because, I'm just not going to comment. I'm going to on to the next one, Brian.
Bob Medill, isn't Williams locked in at nickel unless they go Canadian in that position? Honestly, I don't think, I don't think anybody's locked in anywhere except for a few guys. That secondary is kind of a work in progress. I mean, I'd even be interested to see the TJ Lee and Gary Peters make it out of training camp. I mean, they may bring in some guys that, we can go younger and cheaper here. These guys look great. I know you're giving up a lot of experience there, but I think the Lions secondary is one in progress. And, we're gonna wait a few weeks to see how everything settles back there.
I think it's arguably the biggest position group to watch. Obviously, offensive lineman is probably the easiest answer. Jarrell Broxton, who's going to be left tackle, all that stuff. But when you look at it, defensive back is probably the more legitimate question mark of like who's going to be there. As we know, Brian, it is a business, and I don't think the Lions intended to just hand out starting spots, as you said. Although I do kind of agree that Deontay Williams, I loved what I saw from him last season playing nickel. I think he's a tremendous football player in the box and playing downhill. I know JC specifically.
Vicious hitter.
I know JC specifically. We had a few conversations last year where maybe he wanted to see a little bit more from him in coverage, especially playing that nickel spot, right? You're going to be tasked with, covering receivers. You're kind of that Sam linebacker nickel, I know the Lions call it. But him, as I mentioned, in the box coming downhill is an absolute electric football player. So I do agree with Brian, though. There's no jobs that are just going to be given and handed out. If a football player comes in here and earns that spot, they're going to be given it, especially like a Jet Elad next year who comes in, has a year under his belt, understands the game a little bit more. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting, Brian, because it's such a bummer that like it's in Kamloops and you're not able to have a little bit more boots on the ground and you're kind of just waiting for. I know Julio and Moj do a good job of the Lions in Kamloops or training camp from Kamloops. I forget what their radio show is called, where they give you kind of daily updates and stuff like that, which is cool. But other than that, you're gonna have to wait for first and now updates as well for like some of these position battles where we're hearing from Bakes and Nick for what they saw at practice and stuff like that. So I'm interested because that's the best time of year leading up to the season when you're going to see some of these position battles going on.
All right, that's going to do it for this week. We are going to make an effort to have weekly shows going forward. Folks, the season is upon us. Training camp starts next week. It's time to get back into CFL football, and we're happy that you're joining with us. If you can make sure, please go to YouTube, give us a sub. We'd really appreciate it. It helps the channel grow, helps us get some new perks and stuff for the channel. At BC Lions Den on Twitter. Do you have your Twitter account back yet, Cole?
I do, yes, but I'm taking a little bit of a cleanse from Twitter. That's what I was going to mention about what I didn't see the global picks. But yeah, at Cole McGarvey, you guys can find me. I'll start to be more active, especially now that the season's around the corner.
Right, don't click on any bad links now. All right, everybody. Peace out. We'll talk to you in a week.